Now, because it's quite open here and it's very bright and sunny, I've actually just popped back to the car to get a parasol out so I can work in some shade. But it will be necessary to sit down to get underneath the parasol, because although it's warm and sunny, there's a bit of a breeze, and I need to anchor the parasol into the ground. Fastening it to the easel, even the slightest wind will make it wobble far too much. Now, a little bit of experimentation before I've got comfortable. I've got my parasol anchored to the ground. The ground's very hard actually, because we've had very little rain recently. But I'm fully in the shade, although the sun keeps disappearing behind the clouds. If you don't work in the shade, the glare of the white paper will quickly give you a headache if you're not used to it. And also your pupils dilate, and therefore you underestimate how dark you're making some of the tones. And when you take a painting back home after painting in bright sunlight, you'll find that it's actually rather darker than you thought it was. Okay, so let's start this scene of this blue house. Now, the first thing to decide, and there's some terrific clouds by the way, the first thing to decide with the gable end of this blue house is, do we have it sort of on the right or the left? I'm going to put it about here. The other thing to decide is how high you're going to have the horizon. So let's make a start here and get the gable end. This is a 4B pencil, so I'd rather have a soft, although these little windows are little details. It's such an iconic building, it's worth putting them in. I'd rather have a soft pencil, I was going to say, than and just press lightly, than a hard pencil, which I've then got to press very hard into the paper. There's actually quite a nice sort of diagonal shadow across there when the sun comes out. It's these windows. Just do enough drawing to, quite an interesting little lamp there, enough drawing to guide the brush. Another building here. When you're drawing something fairly well known, at least in this area, and these are just little beach dune cottages, and the North Sea is the other side of the dunes. All of the grass is yellow and really parched. From the lack of rain. And with the distant town is a real jumble of little dots of colour. The only significant feature is a large cream building and the church tower of the St Edmund's Church. And just look carefully at the I've lowered that a little bit because I want to drive it back into the distance. Fence posts here, slightly undulating the land. I think that should be enough. Good, well, we'll stop there and I'll get the paint out. Now, as usual, I've primed my palette before I left home, so I've got some nice soft paint. But as it's so warm and windy, I do occasionally bring this little bottle with some water just to moisten the paint, because you will find on these occasions the paint dries extremely quickly. Now, as usual, my aim is to get as fresh a watercolour as I can by adopting a simple process of painting each area once. Now, given the conditions here, it's windy, it's warm and the humidity is high, I'm not very sure how the paper is going to take the paint. So my usual drill is to just experiment and go for a fairly small area. Now I'm going to get the end of this blue dune cottage first. Now load the brush up with paint so it's all in the belly of the brush, just not in the tip. So let's start here. Now this is a piece of Saunders Waterford Rough 200-pound paper. Not my normal paper actually. It's supposed to be good, but and a lot of artists do use it, but I've had sort of mixed results with it. So I'll be interested to see how this sort of turns out in these circumstances. And then it's blue here and down here. Now, although that's quite a distinct line between that wind-burnt grass, I'm going to put it in straight away, just have a sort of softer edge there, because I want the building to be attached to the ground. I want it to look as if it's growing out of the ground or in the landscape, rather than sort of put on the ground. I want it to look as if it belongs there. And in fact, while I'm doing that, I may as well carry on, get these distant dunes there. A little bit of cobalt violet, which I find a very useful sort of neutralizer. When you squint at this subject, it's surprisingly light, the tones of the ground. Really has been bleached by the sun. So little white flecks of unpainted paper. Just a hint of very light, what might have been grass. I'll just push it, make it a little bit more healthier than it actually is, just for variation. Don't forget, you don't have to paint exactly what it is. You're not a camera. Right, well, having got an idea of how the paper is taking the paint, I think we'll get the sky in. So this is cobalt blue, tiny little bit of cerulean, Make sure you get a nice large wash. And also look at the proportion of the clouds in terms of the size they are in relation to the buildings. Now, this is very, very dilute raw sienna. Now this is cobalt and a bit of burnt sienna. These layered clouds here. Back to the light red, very, very dilute. And I need to make sure they're a bit smaller as we come down towards the horizon. Tiny little bit of cobalt. And then smaller forms as we come down towards the horizon. Go round the buildings if you can. And simplify the sky in the same way as you'd simplify other things. Tiny, let's just put a bit of cerulean with that grey. We have a nice lively sky reflecting the conditions, the bracing wind off the sea. Now the sky is just about dried and I've had a paused just to clean the palette. So let's put in the roof. Go for ultramarine and burnt umber. When you paint an area, start at the outside edge and then do the rest of the painting. This is a little bit darker, just to get the this other building in here. A small area. Just I don't like to rest my hand on the paper too much, but it's so windy that it's shaking the board a bit. There's a little bit more brown here. And then it goes into some foliage. And when I squint at it, I can't really see where the foliage stops, or at least the brown wall stops and the foliage begins. So let's do that as a wet edge, a soft edge. And there's all sort of odd bits and pieces down here, and a little bit of light. And we've also got this dormer. And some sort of chimney mast in there. Ultramarine and cobalt, a little bit darker than this to get the cast shadow. The sun's coming over from my right hand shoulder, so this shadow here is a little bit wider. Tiny little bit of shadow there and there. And we can just put a little indication of this roof here. Ultramarine and the alizarin crimson, a bit of burnt umber, give me a rich dark to give me these two windows. They're quite dark, and we can also get the two large windows. There's a door really here. And while that's drying, a little bit of the gutter line along there. Quite dark in there. And get the diagonal shadow, a bit of a shadow underneath the gutter line. And this is quite an important shadow actually, because it comes across there. And will help indicate where the light is coming from. There's a few, you can only just about see them. The sort of little bit of the shiplap. But worth indicating some of it, just to explain what's going on. After all, this gable end is very much the sort of focal point of the painting. Now, because it's so windy and actually filming conditions are quite difficult, we're able to go straight on. Let's get the church tower. I want to keep all of the edges fairly blurred. And keep changing the colour as you're going. And really it's only certain light areas which stand out. Bit of light red for one or two roofs. Just get an impression of some. back to a bit of green. There's a cream building which has got a bit of a shadow on here and there, and a few windows. And then some grass, well, not grass, shrubs and things in front of it. Another red roof is just catching my eye there. One or two light gable ends. And then more sort of foliage, it's all lost. Don't forget to preserve some lights in there. Some darker green, so let's have some viridian with burnt sienna here. Bit of more burnt sienna just for the roof peeping out from there, and then more of the variegated greens, raw sienna with some viridian, a bit more viridian, stronger dark, so more viridian and burnt sienna, just here. And here. And then we'll just glaze a light wash to link that. Some raw sienna, more sort of compositional strokes to channel the eye towards the main focal point. A little bit of cobalt violet and raw umber, just to strengthen some of this foreground with a bit of dry brush. So in many ways it's what I call sort of abstract realism. And there's a little bit of light green of the marram grass on top of the dunes, way in the distance. I believe in having a regular clean up of the palette. Otherwise, if you're like me, you get lazy and you go back to pre-mixed colours. The object is to keep the colour nice and clean and fresh and attractive. Then I think it's important to refresh your palette with clean paint. Don't forget the object of painting is not always to copy exactly what's in front of you, but to produce, to make a painting, translate what's in front of you into a watercolour. And my guide that I tend to follow is to use attractive colour that looks credible. And the final few strokes that we shall make will be a little few calligraphic strokes, once these people get out of the way, to emphasise various darks and lights and corners. A little dark on the church tower. A little bit darker here to pull that edge out. This little lamp is worth putting in, but very sort of sketchily. There's a downpipe there which I think is worth having. There's a bit of detail. And a red tiled ridge on one of these roofs here. And the back roof I'll have to darken because it belongs to the building behind. Little dark right in here. Really quite sort of thick paint there. And a post that breaks the horizontal, or the skyline I should say, actually helps the distance go back. Another chimney way in the distance. And then a slightly darker wash to indicate that roof here. Let's just hangs over that. Some sort of white gable on the end of that. Just going to darken that corner there a bit. And once you start painting each area twice, you know you're getting towards the end. A couple of darker accents amongst these trees here to give it a slightly more layered effect. Now, although there's been quite a lot of people wandering around, I haven't actually put any of them in. I think I'll just straighten up this edge here. And I think we'll consider that, that done. Now, although it probably appears on camera to be a nice bright and breezy day by the seaside in the sand dunes, it's actually been quite difficult painting conditions with the sun going in and out of the clouds, and my wife has had a lot of trouble holding the camera still. But I hope you've enjoyed the filming, and it encourages you to have a go at painting outside. You know, if you wait for the perfect day, it'll either be always too hot or too cold or too wet. Just go out painting and accept the conditions as they are. You never know, you may end up with a surprising winner. Thanks very much for watching.